The Newsround on Off the Ball.
With Gillette. Put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.
This is News Talk.
Now, you're welcome along to Wednesday evening's Off the Ball. Matt Williams and Niamh Briggs on the way for Wednesday night rugby after 8 o'clock. Miguel Delaney on the football show. Gianni Infantino did himself no favours in front of a European Assembly this afternoon. We'll talk to him about that and a general temperature take on the Premier League. Journalist Regina Sondo is with us from Cameroon. She reports on the crush which resulted in 8 deaths and 38 injuries at the African Cup of Nations. 2 children died on Monday evening, so Regina Sondo is on the ground and will talk to us about all that. Tim Vickery is also on the show. Theneymar has a new 3-part documentary out on Netflix. Frankly, I've watched it, so you don't have to. 53106, the text number. We're at Off the Ball on Twitter. Richie McCormack, good evening.
Hey, Joe.
And Daniel McDonnell of the Irish Independent. Hello, Dan.
Evening, Joe.
Would the Theneymar documentary, Dan, on Netflix take your fancy? Will you have a look? 3-parter, 1 hour each?
I have to be honest, maybe I'm just in my own zone, but that's the first I've heard of that.
It's only out yesterday.
Okay. You've said you've watched it, so we don't have to. So you're telling me it's good. I mean, yeah, I have to say, Joe, I mean, I'm not sure if you're always the most enthusiastic of fellas about too much stuff anyway, but you're not killing me with enthusiasm there.
I'm always enthusiastic when you're on the show.
Yeah, and maybe golf, you know, other things.
No, I watched it. Neymar's not generally been the most sympathetic character, I would say, over the last number of years. There is a great sense of unfulfilled talent. There's a certain, a Prince tag, which he's never quite shaken off. The boy Prince, as Dan Rowan, I think, called him a couple of years ago. And it's hard to see him as a 30-year-old. And you kind of look at his body of work and feel there should have been so much more. And there's the preening and the diving and the screaming, and the move to PSG was very questionable. So from the outset, I wasn't thinking, I can't wait to get an insight into this character who's achieved so much. But I watched it for work purposes. I didn't find it terrible. I mean, generally I'm kind of into these things even for the superficial reasons, to see what's their house like, what's their day-to-day life like, as opposed to...
Are you into that stuff, the house? House, really? I mean, are you into the house, like the cribs type thing, really?
I absolutely would be into that. The trappings.
They're all going to be incredibly ostentatious anyway. So at this point, is anything surprising? Are you looking for something a bit vain, or like over the top, like a portrait of himself or something? Is that what you?
Well, there were several portraits of himself around the house, actually.
Yeah, because I was just thinking, you were in Brazil in 2014, right, for the World Cup. I mean, does any of it touch on any of that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
It flicks,
that would interest me, actually.
It flicks back and forth a lot. So he's talking in the present and it flicks back and then flicks back to the present, and that's how it works. And 14 is very much touched on. Actually, he's had a dodgy back ever since 14 on account of breaking a vertebrae back in 14, right, which I didn't realise.
He also had his funeral before the semi-finals, effectively. You know, remember, the bouquets on the pitch and stuff. You know, like it was... But when you think about it, that is a person's life. You know, I mean, and we all probably even now... even just been a bit facetious sort of talking about it. But he was carrying the hopes of a frenzied nation on his back, you know? So, it's obviously, I mean, if there's insight to the character behind that and the pressures as opposed to the house, you know, I'd be more into the first part of that, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, sure. And the biggest insight I think you get is into the extent to which his father is a very overbearing presence, even to this day. So his father effectively runs the company. When I say the company, Theneymar employs 217 people. Don't ask me what they all do, but he employs 217 people, and they're very intent on building an empire. You know, at one point his father turns to the television and says, like, I don't want my boy to have to work as a TV pundit when he's finished. You know, as if this would be an absolute travesty. So the business side is very much his father's forte. But there's a good old argument between the two of them at one stage where Theneymar Jr., and again, he's 30, but he's very much Theneymar Jr. He's a touch infantilized, I think, as a person. And you sort of understand why he has stayed almost boyish when you see the extent to which his father is all over his affairs. But he's trying to push back a little bit and saying his father's too aggressive and doesn't like the way his father even speaks to people. And the father is not listening to any of this and saying, well, I'm doing this all for you and I'm building the empire for you. And when the time comes, almost like when you're old enough, I'll hand it over to you. So that dynamic is is one of the more interesting aspects. The other thing which caught my eye, because I expected total whitewash. I mean, you do when the main protagonist is cooperating. But what was very interesting is that the three parts were interspersed with vox pops, largely in Paris or Brazil. And I would say 99% of what the fans are saying about Neymar is very, very unflattering. Everything from he's overweight, to he's a prima donna, to he's a diver, to he doesn't care, all he cares is about fame and celebrity, he doesn't work hard enough. This is the general refrain of the fans, interviewed included, which is kind of interesting.
You've given it a bit more of a sell now, I have to say, Joe, in a way, because I kind of wonder, is that second part there, what you say, you kind of wonder, like, even the Drive to Survive phenomenon now, that you see all the other sports are copying it, and maybe the sort of the powder puff documentary that's over the top, just painting someone in a very, very favourable light, that isn't actually good for the brand anymore, and you actually do have the sports documentary now. For example, something like Drive to Survive, which has taken off, and I know it had its critics still from maybe real hardcore fans of the sport, but I mean, it wasn't 100% whitewash stuff at all. Like, it gave you a little bit more of the character. So the fact that you're talking about an argument and a bit more negative commentary, and okay, I think maybe it is worth watching.
Yeah, have a look. Have a look. I wouldn't, like I said, Richie, I wouldn't have been jumping to get into Neymar necessarily, even though he's been such a big global figure for, I guess, a decade now. But it's not terrible. Will you have a look?
No, being honest.
Yeah.
I'm curious, but it's somebody that you can never ever warm to, no matter how many insights you get to him, because. And like you were there in 2014. I was there 2 years later when he essentially carried a young Brazil side to the Olympic title, and that was almost a silver medal in terms of his achievements compared to 2014. And the way that he was, idolised on that night, I'll never forget the noise that was made when he struck the winning penalty. And it seemed like it was bigger than any other player would get at the time. But he's one of these players that seems there's great players that raise the levels of others around them within a team. Like Maradona was certainly one of those players, and there have been countless others as well. But Neymar is a great player who doesn't manage to raise the levels of others around him because he's so much in it for himself. And the move to PSG encapsulates that. Like he's so much about brand Neymar. And like, more footballers are going to be like this. Let's not fool ourselves. But he's all about, putting forward himself rather than the team that he's playing for. The team he's playing for is immaterial. It's what's the best deal and next around the corner. And I think he touches on that in the documentary, and that he almost left PSG after they lost in the semi-finals of the Champions League, but wanted to continue in a rare moment of candour and honesty. But yeah, he's not somebody I could find myself warming to easily.
No, that's the general feeling on him. So Tim Vickery's with us on the Football Show to chat Neymar. Dan, just before we start Richie's news round, and there is a busy news round to get to, Vitor Pereira. There are different ways to interview for a job, of course. Vitor Pereira has decided to pick a fight with the club before he gets the job, which is an interesting way of going about things.
Well, I would suggest he's not going to get the job, you would say. I don't know if people are aware of this, but he went on Sky Sports News today to do a live interview. Now, listen, I mean, I'm up for the concept of managers doing like exit interviews after they have an interview for a job. It's not like, you used to live off Harry Redknapp rolling down the window and giving a transfer window update potentially to someone, but if someone after being interviewed then wants to come on and give that sort of 3.5 minute review on how it went, almost like a first dates debrief or something, talking about how it went, and I thought I impressed them at first with my discussion about the style of play I wanted to play, and I met Ken Wright or whoever else. It's lovely, but clearly an insane strategy, and more so reflective of. If you're being entirely cynical, and it's not even, don't even need to be massively cynical to see that it seems like more of a strategy of someone who may not be getting the job, but it's good to have his name out there and to be out there on Sky Sports News, because presumably the next job that comes up, his name is a little bit more in the consciousness in this part of the world, because I mean, how things, I mean, it's very rare that you get anyone to speak who's in the middle of a job hunt. You wouldn't, it's not as if you send the researcher to ask the question and see if you give him a buzz. When you give him a buzz and see if he'll come on, and talk about the Everton job interview, it's clearly been a lot more, you could say, choreographed in some way, and that leads you to be somewhat sceptical about it. But
what did he say on Sky Sports News?
Well, he spoke about how he had spoken with Bill Kenwright, I think years ago, initially, and then went into discussing his plans for Everton, how he remembered Everton, the leaders of Jagielka and Baines and Coleman got a mention, and then he spoke a bit about the interview itself, and maybe how he spoke a little bit about the style of play he wanted, and then he was asked about this graffiti which seems to have popped up somewhere in Liverpool where someone has sprayed Pereira out, Lampard in on a wall somewhere. Now, I'm not in touch with the mood of the Everton fans. I didn't realise that there was a group out there that wanted Frank Lampard so badly that they've effectively taken to the streets in an act of sort of, let's get some graffiti, some art to go in with our mood here. But it's just all it's all become a little bit sort of embarrassing in a way for Everton that someone who clearly was a serious candidate has opted to sort of go this very unorthodox route. As I said, I sort of welcome it in a way. If people want to go full transparency and just start openly talking about interviews before a job decision has been made, that's great. But I don't think it's a hugely conventional way that things are going to go from this way forward. But it certainly seems to have the footprints of an agent over it, it has to be said. I don't think there's anything revelatory, dramatic in reaching that conclusion about the overall situation.
Yeah, very, very strange. We will start the news round. Dan McDonnell with us here on the news round this evening, as is Richie McCormack. It is brought to you by Gillette. Put your best face forward with our new and improved razors. And Richie, you've done it again. You're giving Dan nothing but rugby news all the way.
Absolutely. Ian Henderson is Andy Farrell's only real injury concern ahead of the start of the Six Nations. The Ulster lock hasn't played since mid-December due to an ankle injury. Joey Carberry sustained a fractured elbow on the same weekend, but Farrell insists the Munster out half will be fit for the visit of defending champions Wales on Saturday week. After a promising autumn, Farrell said today at the media launch that there's no chance of his team resting on the laurels.
Get stuck into the lessons learned and make sure that we focus on how we're going to get better, I know everyone would say that, but it's the truth. We want to get on the edge of our comfort zone and push the boundaries for ourselves to get better as a team. And we feel we've pushed on and probably got our foundations in order. The fundamentals of our game are certainly better, but there's certainly a lot more to do.
We've got Matt Williams and Nick Briggs on the way after 8 o'clock. Bit of a blow for England.
Yeah, England captain Owen Farrell ruled out of the entire Six Nations campaign. The Saracens out half underwent ankle surgery today, which will keep him out for 10 weeks. George Ford was already called up as a replacement earlier this week, but Eddie Jones has big plans for his squad beyond the next 8 weeks.
They're excited about the prospect of where we can take this team, and our immediate goal is to win the Six Nations, and obviously our ultimate goal is to win the World Cup. And we know we've got a number of areas we need to keep improving in, so it's having that discipline and that focus and that attention to make sure every day we're paying attention to the things that are going to be important in improving the team. And this is a high quality competition.
Do you like that, Dan? Eddie Jones just saying it bluntly, even 18 months out, our goal is to win the World Cup.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to say Eddie Jones is sort of always a good interview, isn't he? So that's what you want, characters to get you engaged in the game. I mean, there's nothing I love more in rugby than a good focus on the World Cup, a good bit off. Whatever goes wrong when you do that, it's that seems to always end well from my casual knowledge of this situation.
It ends okay for other countries at times. Nothing seems to end well for us. So whether we're focused on the World Cup or not focused on the World Cup, it tends to go awry. Now, this story certainly has caught your eye, Dan, I know. So, Richie mentioned it last night, but confirmation of the deal between St. Pat's and Udinese?
Yeah, done deal. James Abankwah is a Udinese player. The 18-year-old defender will remain, though, at the Inchicore club until July as he completes his leaving cert. It's believed the Pats have secured a record fee for a League of Ireland player, believed to be in excess of the €500,000 that Shamrock Rovers received from Manchester City for Gavin Bazunu back in 2018.
Yeah, amazing for James Abankwah, off to Italy when he does his leaving cert. So he's pretty much looking around the exam hall saying, I'm winning this summer, everyone, regardless of what you're all up to. So is it Longford originally, Dan, and then Cherry Orchard for a time, and now St. Pat's, and now suddenly Udinese? So life's moving pretty fast for this guy.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's an incredible deal for him. I mean, I've heard conflicting figures about the fee, I have to say, and whether it's record breaking or not, but it's certainly a good deal, really, and that's only... It's irrelevant. Like, it's certainly in that ballpark. This is a new type of deal in some ways. I mean, the fact he's going to Italy, and Kevin Zeffy from Shamrock Rovers went to Inter Milan last year, so it was not the first Irish player to go that route. I think there's just a couple of striking things about it. Maybe this is just reflective of the new normal now post-Brexit, that we know more about these lads before they go. You know, at a previous time, someone like James Abankwah, like his elder brother went to Burnley when he was younger, a talented player as well. Hasn't necessarily happened from there. But, you know, previously maybe someone like James Abankwah, although he was, I gather, a little bit of a late developer even in the schoolboy scene here, that he wasn't like outstanding at 15, but then really improved in the next sort of 18 months. They might have gone at 16 and they're leaving somewhere wouldn't be a news report anywhere. You know, it sort of wouldn't. But he played the first team football for St. Pat's last year. I think 13 appearances, come off the bench in the FAI Cup final. So he's already played at 17 in front of 37,000 people in a pretty decent game in the Aviva Stadium, did very well. And I think off the back of that and his Irish underage stuff, Udinese have decided to come in and pay proper money. And this is a big talking point within football here at the moment, that a lot of players have left over the winter. You know, to various levels. You know, Johnny Kenny went to Celtic, John Matton to St Johnstone. There's a few other a kid called Killian Phillips from Drogheda to Crystal Palace. Good moves, but in each case there's been a real analysis of the fees, and there's been like release clauses in contracts of, you know, ranging from sort of 50 grand to 150 grand, which some people would take the argument that this is not great. Like, it's underselling potentially what the value of these players might be. And that's to do with a traditional maybe perception of the game here and the standing of the game here, which hasn't always been unfair, it has to be said. But what you have to say is that I think St. Pat's and I think Shamrock Rovers have done similarly in recent years. They've been willing to play a hardball a bit in terms of demanding fees for players, but also in certain cases, clubs such as Manchester City with Bazunu and Udinese in this case seem willing to come forward and pay a bit of respect and pay decent money, rather than maybe paying the sort of, let's just try and get away with the 10, 15, 20 grand type offers, which has, you know, it's a curse that's holding the game back here. So there's a lot of interesting elements to it beyond the novelty value of an Irish player with an interesting backstory going to Serie A. I understand for a lot of people, you know, lad who grew up in Longford going to Serie A, there's an attractive line to that. But there's also a significance, I think, in the monetary aspect of it, which is very interesting post-Brexit, because in years to come, we're going to see a lot more players leave at 18 that will be a little bit better known, you know, because they've played in the league here. And will that lead to more fees coming in, bigger fees coming in? We'll have to see. But you have the situation now in the next 6 months where, you know, James Abankwah is going to be here playing for St. Pat's. And, you know, you can point him out to someone on the pitch and say, that kid there, he's joining Udinese in the summer. And that hasn't always been there before, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It will be more common going forward.
Yeah. And do we know, Dan, every time he plays for Ireland, will St. Pat's get £1 million or something like that?
Yeah, that's where the Bazunu one went to another level. If that clause wants to become a habit, I think people will get on board with that. But yeah, I think Gavin Bazunu has ended up gone over to, you know, over 1.5 million. Now, what I would say in defence of some of those other clubs I mentioned earlier who maybe sold some players for a cheaper amount, what they're hanging on to is these sell-on clauses, you know, for cheap money, but then maybe you get 10% of a deal. And like the Matt Doherty one, that ended up getting 1.5 million quid or something for Bows 10, 11 years later. But clearly more upfront cash is needed to create a slightly more viable industry here in terms of young player production. So that's the bigger picture aspect to this.
No, it's good.
And it's thrilling.
It demonstrates a faith on Serie A's part in this instance in the quality on the pitch in the League of Ireland. So why wouldn't we all have a bit more faith in it, I suppose, is the other obvious point, as well as money rolling in. Richie, water breaks, RIP is your next headline.
Yeah, water breaks have been consigned to the dustbin of history. Instead, the GAA is going to allow teams to have 2 Mairishka on the sideline for each game, starting with the National League this coming weekend. The divisive water break rule was introduced during the pandemic, but is now history. Divisive.
Everything's divisive. I didn't mind either. It
was.
Way. I know.
I kind of like them. Most people, when the story popped up initially, I think it was last week, and the fact that GA were floating the idea that this is a dead duck, a lot of people were like, thank God, like, we got to get rid of these things. They're shambles, they're nonsense. Like, I kind of liked, especially that one in the second half, because it was a definite point. Like, it's almost like when a car rears into the final straight, coming around a track, like, you knew this was like the last bit before takeoff. You knew that the last 17 minutes coming was going to be something pretty special. They're either going to be fireworks, or somebody was either going to, move ahead and put the game out of sight completely. But I liked the sense of drama, particularly that the second half one added, and just taking them away. I don't know, it's grand and all. Like, it's not going to make a huge difference. But I wouldn't be as against them as a lot of people were over the last few weeks.
Yeah, I was a bit indifferent, to be honest. I didn't notice them half the time all that much, But like that said, this summer, when we're into the teeth of a great second half, I'm not going to be saying, God, we really need a water break here either. So we are going to be talking African Cup of Nations very, very shortly at this hour. More about the events off the field, which were desperately tragic on Monday evening. There is action on at the moment.
Yeah, indeed. Mo Salah struck the winning penalty as Egypt progressed to the quarterfinals at the Africa Cup of Nations. The Pharaohs won a shootout with Ivory Coast 5-4 following a goalless 120 minutes in Douala this evening. Manchester United defender Eric Bailly missed for the Ivorians, with Egypt sealing a last date with Morocco. There was a 7 p.m. start in Limbe, where it remains Mali 0, Equatorial Guinea 0. The winners of that one will play Senegal, Sadio Mane and all, in the last 8.
Dan, Roberto Lopez bowed out.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously grades of what's happened in the last couple of days, and the sort of the stadium crush, stampede, and the death sort of hangs over everything else that's happened. And I would have been speaking to Roberto Lopez. I mean, he would have played his 3 games in the group stages at the same stadium, and actually would have, in his diaries and stuff, would have discussed, the crowd rushing up to the buses outside the stadium and stuff. So it's very real, I suppose, when he's describing that scene from last week. But by scale, they've had a disastrous week, Cape Verde, in terms of around their exit. Including him himself. A lot of people might have seen the footage last night of him vomiting in the tunnel at half time in the Senegal game, because they got dosed with a pretty bad spate of food poisoning around the camp, and up to 14 players affected. And it does seem it was quite chaotic in terms of their preparations and even some of the arrangements in the hotel. I would have been speaking to them earlier on with a view to maybe talking more about this later in the week. And they went out to Senegal, and the players sent off in each half, and half their squad was sort of debilitated by a condition that they couldn't really control, including him, who was doing extremely well, and then had to go off in the biggest game of his life at half time. So not ideal at all. Not an ideal way to go out. But I think he's boosted his own reputation considerably. But it's been a strange all week. That stampede is hangs over everything else. But even some of the refereeing decisions against some of the smaller nations, you would have to say, have been questionable at best.
Right. Rich, we might skip on to Gianni Infantino if we can.
Yeah, the FIFA president has come in for strong criticism today after claiming staging a World Cup every 2 years would help prevent refugees fleeing their countries. Anti-racism group Kick It Out have described his claims as totally unacceptable. Infantino made the comments while addressing a parliamentary session of the Council of Europe.
And we cannot say to the rest of the world, give us your money. If you have or happen to have a good player by coincidence, give us the player as well. But watch us on TV. We need to include them. We need to find ways to include the entire world, to give hope to Africans so that they don't need to cross the Mediterranean in order to find maybe a better life, but more probably death in the sea. We need to give opportunities, and we need to give dignity, not by giving charity, but by allowing the rest of the world as well to participate.
Dan, this has received the reaction you might expect.
I mean, Andrew Jennings passed away, I think the week before last, and like a lot of people, I would always urge them to seek out Foul, which is his book about FIFA's historic corruption going back a long period of time. And clearly, there's nothing corrupt about what's been said here. This is just someone spouting rubbish, basically. But what that Foul does brilliantly is point out how FIFA, the old FIFA, as they would say, they had this great idea of imagining themselves as a nation state, like, they were a country above everything else, and that they would get sort of Blatter and co. They'd speak in this language about that the force for good FIFA can be, and delve into issues really that they shouldn't be delving into, and it's something to do with how they see themselves in the world. And it does seem that Infantino is just is going down a similar road, when really what's behind this to many degrees is getting the biennial World Cup in, and how that in some ways can be equated to like the situations that sort of fleeing refugees or migrants have found themselves in. I mean, it's baffling, but it really just goes to show that when you ask yourself, have FIFA reformed in any great or remarkable way, they clearly haven't. And I mean, you say the reaction is as you would expect, but that reaction is probably going to be quite more so central towards the places that don't like FIFA or Infantino very much anyway. And his message is all about trying to sell this to the nations who might vote for them, and that's the way FIFA has operated for some time. But
to weaponise that tragic occurrence, which is far too great, is shameful, especially when you're weaponising it to get an extra World Cup into every 4 years. And the other point, Richie, actually, and this just speaks to the rank hypocrisy of this organisation, is he claimed the real figure of worker deaths for Qatar 2022 preparations is 3, that only 3 workers have died in the preparations for the Qatar World Cup, the FIFA World Cup, which is just a lie.
Yeah, thousands, of course, as Amnesty International a report put out late last year attested to. But like it goes to Dan's point, and it goes to the Jennings book fell, and especially happened to Blatter, because I remember I was reading a lot of like World Soccer in the mid-90s, and Blatter was often referred to in that magazine. Kerr Radnich was its editor at the time, as SEP 1001 Bad Ideas Blatter, and Infantino has kind of taken on that mantle. There comes something with that job where, and maybe it plays into that nation state ideology that they have, that they become separated from reality. And there is a lot of that. To state that there's only been 3 deaths involved in the building of the stadia for Qatar 2022 is a lie. And that, equating, giving hope to quote unquote Africans, as he put it today, that they would benefit and not have to migrate to countries that would be far safer for them because of a biennial World Cup, is nothing short of crass. And there's no, unless there's a groundswell of support for, an underling or somebody to come and overthrow these kind of people, then it's just going to keep rolling. And you're going to have Infantino's yes men pushing through these bad ideas and bad sentiments one after another. And there's nothing we can do about it. And that's the grim reality of the situation. Like, people are he's talking about people bettering their situations. The situation for football globally won't be bettered because people like that are in charge of it.
Fellas, we're out of time. Richie, thanks, Mel.
Nice one.
Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Joe.
Your chance to win big. News Talk's Cash Machine.